All right, this is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3.
Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for good programming, and I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Okay, it is Monday, July 13th, and, usually I have, 3 or 4 things that I want to make sure that I talk about at the beginning of the show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, today there are 7 things, so I'm not going to get to it all, but we'll do the best we can. First and foremost, I'm sure you've heard by now that Lindsey Graham died over the weekend. Cause of death, aortic dissection. Do you remember the actor John Ritter, who died suddenly on the set of his sitcom? That was an aortic dissection. What it means basically is a tear in your aorta, and depending upon where the tear is and how deep the tear goes, you are either pretty much dead instantly, or if you don't have a very serious tear and you get to the hospital right away, you have anywhere from, you have about a 25, at most 50% chance of making it. It is, the interesting thing is, if you have a regular physical exam, sometimes this can be caught. I remember when I was in my 30s, I went for a checkup, and my doctor, how they palpate your stomach, and he looked at me and he said, "I'm sending you for an emergency CAT scan." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "I think you might have a aortic dissection." And I was like, "What?" As it turned out, I had an inflamed small intestine. And because of the inflammation, when he went to feel the pulse in my aorta, it spread out over too wide an area because the intestine was echoing the pulse. So I did not have an aortic dissection. But it is not that uncommon in especially white males of a certain age. And I don't know. Lots of times before it rips entirely, it rips a little bit, and that's when doctors can find it. Like, the pulse from the aorta isn't just confined to one little spot. It's spread out. That tells them that there's a problem with the aorta. But you would think Lindsey Graham and John Ritter would have access to the best health care, so it can come on suddenly, and it is a really difficult thing to survive. So Lindsey Graham apparently succumbed to an aortic dissection. He was 71 years old. He had just gotten back from a trip to Ukraine. Literally, I think like that morning, Donald Trump spoke with him, and a few hours later, he was gone. He was up for re-election this January. Dr. Annie Andrews is the Democratic choice to go for that seat. Lindsey Graham was going to, of course, run for re-election. At 71, he was kind of one of the younger members of the gerontocracy that we have elected. But it's interesting because the governor can weigh in on who is going to fill that seat till January, when there will be an election. And Donald Trump may have just made his life more difficult, because Donald Trump wants the governor to put Lindsey Graham's sister in that seat. Darlene Graham Nordone. Trump wants her to be an interim replacement because, Lindsey really loved her. So it's a nice thing we could do for her. And the problem with that, as I'm sure Republican Governor Henry McMaster is contemplating, when you can find a viable candidate and give them what is essentially a head start, if the Republican Party, which I'm sure is scrambling now, has somebody who they think they want to put on the ballot against Annie Andrews, putting that person to fill Graham's seat would have given them a bit of a leg up. It's not the same sort of power as being a true incumbent, but, by the time January rolls around, Republicans would get a feel for whether or not they like this person, and if they do, South Carolina is a pretty Republican state. But if Donald Trump wants this seat given to Lindsey Graham's sister as sort of a tribute, a thank you to honor Lindsey Graham's love for his sister, unless she plans to run for that seat in January, it would kind of seem like the Republicans in South Carolina would consider that a wasted opportunity. So, does the Republican go ahead with what Donald Trump has very publicly stated he wants and risk antagonizing him? Or does the Republican Party of South Carolina figure out who their most valuable and potentially successful Republican candidate for that seat is and give them a leg up by getting them in the seat now? I wouldn't want to be in McMaster's shoes. My guess is he will do what the president wants, even though it will make it potentially harder for a Republican who's not Darlene to run against Annie Andrews. But you know what? Donald Trump never has cared about the Republican Party. He never really has cared about who gets into office and who doesn't. This is the guy who's gone after Republican incumbents, who many of whom would probably have been reelected, but they weren't loyal enough. Anyway, Michael Wolff, the author of Fire and Fury, the guy who is currently suing Melania Trump, and in the course of that lawsuit wants very much to depose Melania Trump and Donald Trump. He clearly, with his time very close to Donald Trump, he clearly knew Lindsey Graham, and clearly was not particularly a fan of Lindsey Graham, as many people are not. I thought he had a really interesting take on Lindsey's death. Listen to Michael Wolff on Lindsey Graham.
History will long note Lindsey Graham as one of the emblematic figures of Trump politics. He, like so many others, but with even more shamelessness, understood that the key to political survival was to disregard all self-respect and all personal scruples and become a Donald Trump suck-up. Lindsey Graham is the model for J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and so many others. A South Carolina Republican who was in the closet, but not in the closet enough so that everyone in Washington didn't know, really had perfected the art of political survival. And when Donald Trump came along and held Lindsey Graham's gayness as a threat over his head, Lindsey understood that he had to be a Trump lackey. That was what was necessary for him to exist in Donald Trump's Washington. Of course, dead at 71, he didn't survive. And that should give all other Trump lackeys pause. Everybody thinks that they can outweight him and do whatever it takes to get beyond Donald Trump and to do something better with their lives and their careers. But to date, whether feet first or otherwise, nobody has.
So there you have it. Let's see. We got proof of life. It sounds so absurd. From Mitch McConnell over the weekend. Yes, a picture of him sitting up and smiling in his hospital bed. His wife, Elaine Chao, beside him. He's very carefully holding the Washington Post so we can make sure that the date is current. He said he fell. He doesn't know why he fell. And the reason he hasn't said anything about his health condition is because, you know, as an older person, you know, you just like don't want to admit that you're getting frail and, you know, you don't want to admit to weakness. So that's why nobody has heard anything from me for weeks and weeks. But I've been in the hospital. They've been doing all these tests to try to figure out why I fell, you know, and so far they haven't come up with a reason. So apparently Mitch passed out, fell. Apparently he hit his head on the way down. But according to Mitch McConnell, he's right as rain. So there you go. Mitch McConnell smiling from his hospital bed. But the memes haven't stopped. Jimmy Kimmel posted the same picture, only instead of Mitch McConnell, it was Jimmy Kimmel sitting in bed holding Elaine Chao's hand. You may have seen the AI where Mitch McConnell gets out of bed and does a dance routine to show how healthy he is. So apparently, the rumors of his death are unfounded. It's totally bizarre, though, that, you know, if that's all it was, hey, he took a fall. Doctors are trying to figure out why. And that's the reason for a month of silence? That's just too weird. We did lose Sam Neill. You might remember him from Jurassic Park. Did all 3 of the Jurassic Park movies. You know, you can always tell, you know, when somebody who's famous dies, especially an actor, a lot of people will, you know, post some nice things about, you know, my heart goes out to their family. But when somebody really was liked and appreciated and admired, the comments come pouring out. And that's what's happened with Sam Neill. He's a New Zealand actor. And, oh my gosh, everybody, it seems, who's ever worked with him or knew him is posting what a great guy he was, what an even keel he was on movie sets and television sets, how sweet he was, how collaborative he was, basically just what a great guy he was. If you're of a certain age, you might remember one of the first movies that Nicole Kidman starred in. It was called Dead Calm. It was a horror movie about people on a sailboat. Sam Neill was in that movie with her. She said wonderful things about him. He was on television on Peaky Blinders. It's a show I've never watched, but a lot of people have told me that it's just great. Cillian Murphy posted how wonderful Sam Neill was. Steven Spielberg, who worked with him, obviously, on the Jurassic Park movies, Laura Dern. I mean, the outpouring has been literally that, an outpouring. And when you see that kind of reaction, then you know this isn't just people being polite, that he really was a great guy. He had suffered from a blood cancer for a while, but he announced recently that he was in remission, that he no longer had the cancer, he was cancer-free. But whatever happened, it happened rapidly. And certainly, while cancer is definitely something to be concerned about, those of us who've gone through chemotherapy know that chemotherapy in and of itself takes a real toll on your body and can permanently impair certain functions of your body. So I'm sure at some point we will get a more precise cause of death for this actor who apparently everybody who knew him, everybody who worked with him loved him. Okay, God help us, let's talk about Iran. Do we have a ceasefire? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Oh, but, I think Donald Trump's figured, Iran isn't the only one who can take charge of the Strait of Hormuz. We can too. And that's now what Donald Trump is saying. We are going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. And if and when we reopen it to traffic, anybody who is traveling through the strait owes the United States some sort of 20% fee, a 20% charge. 20% of what? That's a very good question. But every cargo shipment that goes through, there's some sort of 20% fee that we are imposing, according to Donald Trump today. In one of his social media posts, he said the USA will be, from this point forward, known as, and this is all capital letters, which any of you who text or post on social media knows, shouting, the guardian of the Hormuz Strait. That's what we are now, kids. We are the guardian of the Hormuz Strait. Now, how does Iran feel about that? Well, they're not so crazy about it. They posted, we will under no circumstances allow the United States to interfere in the management of the Strait of Hormuz. There you go. And oh, by the way, we're still like randomly firing at each other. It just gets weirder and weirder. Oh, and one little bit of good news that I want to share with you. Woo-hoo-hoo. You know how Donald Trump cut a deal with himself and said, the IRS is going to pay me all this money. And they've signed a deal where me and my family were never, ever going to be audited. All the audits that have ever been done are going to be dismissed. Well, that deal was looked over by a federal judge. That federal judge ruled today that this lawsuit against the IRS, the one where the IRS was supposed to pay him a whole bunch of money, was an improper exercise in self-dealing. Okie dokie. The attorney who brought the case before that judge has reached out to the Florida State Bar and recommended that the Florida State Bar discipline the attorney that brought this case. Oh, and by the way, apparently the federal judge in this situation made copies of this deal and the ruling and the fact that the attorney who was in court is going to be recommended for discipline, sent all that material to the New York bar and basically told them that they really ought to look this over, that maybe Todd Blanche needs to be disciplined or disbarred himself. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Kathleen Williams, 56-page order. So she's going to send her decision and all the stuff to the New York bar, and they can use it if they wish against Todd Blanche. They have been investigating Todd Blanche in New York. Yay, us. Isn't it nice when something seems to go right? And in the something seems to be going right department, as we have long suspected, at least 3 state attorneys general have filed suit to try to stop the Paramount Warner Brothers Discovery merger. There's also, most of Europe has okayed it, but I think the United Kingdom is still looking it over as well. There was a news conference today where the California Attorney General made a statement about this. He talked about this Paramount lawsuit. This is Attorney General Bonta. Listen to this.
As our complaint makes clear, this deal is illegal under the Clayton Act. That is a law that has been on the books for over 100 years. It prevents mergers that may substantially lessen competition or tend to create a monopoly. By combining 2 of the 5 largest film distributors and 2 of the 5 largest basic channel owners, basic cable channel owners, the resulting behemoth would control nearly 1/3 of theatrical motion pictures and nearly 1/3 of basic cable programming, including 50 of the most popular cable channels. It'd be particularly harmful to anticipated top-grossing films, or often referred to as blockbusters or tentpole films, as this merger would give the combined company control of more than 30% of blockbusters. In total, just 4 distributors would control more than 90% of blockbusters, movies that have massive production budgets and help drive traffic to movie theaters. For more than a century, Paramount and Warner Brothers have squared off as fierce competitors, which has fueled powerful projects that have stood the test of time. We're talking Titanic, The Godfather, The Matrix, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and Casablanca, just to name a few. Who knows what those movies would have been like if not for the competition driving the distributors to produce their best work. There is no debate here. This merger would snuff out competition, drive up prices, diminish content quality, and produce fewer movies and shows each year. That is the bottom line. We have antitrust laws and merger controls for a reason, because competition is the lifeblood of a healthy and vibrant economy.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta, who is joined by New York, Colorado, New Mexico, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Nevada as part of this suit. David Ellison's Paramount company put out a statement that this merger is good for competition. This merger will mean there will be more competition because, you know, monopolies, they really compete with themselves. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with calls and texts and more news of the day right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We have the text line open. The phone line is open. 773-763-9288. 9278, 773-763-9278. You know, after we talk, you and me, amongst ourselves, we're going to talk with Chris Bury about the news of the day. And then we're going to talk with Joel Ostro about what's going on with NATO and Russia and Ukraine. I'm going to keep the phone and text lines open pretty much all day today. If you would like to join these conversations as well. Here's a text that came in. All this talk about Lindsey Graham being Trump's golf buddy is ridiculous. It was more about making a deal with the devil after all the truth he told about Trump earlier. Obviously, he turned into another enabler who was used by the malignant narcissist with no self-awareness or moral compass. The sooner the nation sheds itself of Trump, the better. If you recall, and there's frankly no reason why you should, Lindsey Graham's background, Lindsey Graham has always associated himself with a person who is stronger than he is, and he has mirrored that person's desires and thoughts. He was, and you may not even remember this, he was very, very close to John McCain. John McCain, who you know, was a Republican, was a conservative, but also was somebody with a firm moral compass. After John McCain's death, Lindsey apparently needed to find a new, strong person to follow, and I guess that turned into Donald Trump, which leads to the conclusion that Lindsey Graham is a very, very weak man. He could not stand on his own. He needed to be in the shadow, in the shelter provided by a much stronger man. Too bad John McCain didn't stay alive. We would have seen a much better Lindsey Graham. Yeah, the Lindsey Graham who used to look askance at Donald Trump. So there you have that. Let's go to the phone lines. Our friend Jim is on the line from Chicago. Hey, Jim, how are you today?
The Strait of Hormuz, Joan. That's all I can think of is the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, you know what? Iran, I've just been reading, they're starting to make fun of Donald Trump. That his idea that somehow he's going to control the Strait of Hormuz, they think that is really hilarious.
Yeah, the divergence of opinion by military experts and so on, and coming down some of the old retired generals, you know, we need troops on the ground, and we got to get, go into a full-scale invasion of Iran. But in the meantime, the rest of the world, the UN and so on, so this is a disaster. They're not going to put any troops on the ground. So this is a disaster. But it's also dry. You know, Joan, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed at the store that sirloin has gone up a couple of bucks. Milk has gone up $1. I mean, so the point is we're paying for this folly. And as a landlubber, I never heard of the Strait of Hormuz. But anyway, Joan, the other thing is, what about demolition derby up in Maine? Again, a person's boxed in by ICE and then shot. I mean, how long can we tolerate this? I don't understand. And with no response from ICE, no response from Kash Patel or anybody else, people being murdered in the streets of America. I never thought I'd live to see this. Mm-hmm. But another one up in Maine.
Yep.
And in the same
Donald Trump's personal enforcers. This has nothing to do with immigration at this point. These are Donald Trump's thugs.
Yeah, did you see they've got a graphic where it shows how many people have been thrown out of Illinois. It's up to the moon now. It's gone from, like a couple of hundred. Now it's up to thousands of people who have to sign these. Who wouldn't sign them, Joan? If you're facing one of these prisons, for-profit prisons, They've got a gentleman in there who is from, oh my God, he's from, one of the, anyway, his wife was on. He's been in the country for 36 years, worked like a dog. He has a conviction of some ridiculous thing 10 years ago, but he's never served any time for it. But anyway, they're using it as an excuse to keep him in a prison. He's been in prison for 6 months. He's from Jamaica, by the way, as I just thought of it. And there's no rhyme or reason to this. It's just, and he happened to get a phone call. She was being interviewed, and he got a phone call he called his wife, and she asked him, how are you doing? He goes, I lost 25 pounds. He says, I'm out of my mind. He goes, I don't know where I'm going. They've taken me to 3 different prisons. And she said, well, if he signs the agreement to go back to Jamaica, he's been here for 35 years working like a dog. What's he supposed to go back to Jamaica and head for a homeless shelter there until the point's unknown? I mean, this is absurd, absolutely absurd. And just this, oh my God, the incompetence of the ICE and the incompetence of these people.
And it's not only Maine. There was a shooting in Houston, and ICE shot a guy to death, and they put out a statement about how the guy was like going after their vehicle and being a nuisance. Only there's tons of video that seem to indicate none of that is true. None of it is true.
But as Americans, we can't tolerate this. This is so un-American. Anyway, Joan, thanks for taking my call. You sound like you got a good list of guests coming. A good list of guests coming up. Thank you, Joan.
Yeah,
thank you much.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. And remember the killing of Renee Good and Mr. Preddy back in Minnesota, and we've been waiting for Mary Moriarty to do something about it. And Mary Moriarty, the chief legal officer for Hennepin County, the one who would need to bring charges if indeed charges are ever going to be brought. Well, her office has been saying all along, oh, yeah, the government isn't sharing evidence with us, so it's going to be really, really hard to bring charges. Well, for whatever reason, apparently there has been some movement on the part of the government to share at least certain things about this crime with Mary Moriarty. She did a press conference with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and listen to what Mary Moriarty had to say.
Today, I am proud to announce that we have reached another important milestone in our work. Through the cooperation of our federal partners, we have obtained the hard drives of previously withheld evidence in the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy and the shooting of Julio Sosa Solis. We have also obtained some of the physical evidence that was previously withheld, including Renee Good's car. Our lawyers are working collaboratively with the BCA, the Attorney General's Office, and our federal partners to facilitate ongoing evidence exchange. The BCA has also shared its files on these cases with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I want to thank our federal partners for their willingness to consider changing course to share evidence and promote public trust. Obtaining this evidence has been a priority for us since January 7th. It has been rightfully demanded by our community for the past 6 months. The collective effort from our staff, the Attorney General's Office, and the BCA to make this happen is staggering. So the question is about, does this change the timing in terms of when or whether our office is able to make a charging decision? So we got a voluminous amount of discovery, and we began looking at that last week. We continue to look at it. I've always been transparent about this. I've never promised any deadlines because those would be artificial. We will be thorough, we will be complete, and we will make a decision. We will be very public about that. The wonderful thing is now is we have all the evidence. We don't have to speculate about what we don't have. So that certainly makes our analysis, our examination much easier once we're able to get through the volume of information that we have.
Do you think that the feds releasing all this information in Minnesota assuming that Mary Moriarty is actually going to act on it, will that offset the criticism they get for killing a man in Houston and then apparently, at least as what the video shows, apparently lying about it? I don't know. I don't know. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more texts and calls right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We're taking your calls and reading your texts. After that, we're going to talk to Chris Beery and later political science professor Joel Ostro. I'm going to keep the text lines and the phone lines open if you would like to be a part of those conversations. But right now, let's go back to the phone lines. Our good friend Ron is on the line from Chicago. Hey, Ron.
Hello. Trump later said we are going to be the guardian angel of the Strait of Hormuz.
Are we?
Yes,
the guardian angel. I know we're going to be the guard. Actually, I'm not sure if we're guarding it, if we're just going to set up a toll booth and so that they can pay us their 20%. 20% of what? Of what their cargo is worth? I don't know. It's very, very puzzling.
No personal checks.
Yeah, exactly.
And the man who was shot in Houston, the ICE agents, they are supposed to be wearing body cameras, but they did not. So,
I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
And there was another shooting in Maine today, so it's another one.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the hits just keep on coming. You know, and I don't understand. Forget about whether or not they're wearing body cams. Have they not learned by now that as soon as they show up anywhere, people start recording video with their phones? So, oh no, he rammed our car. Well, actually, he didn't.
Yeah, their reasoning is that he resembled somebody we were looking for. That's why they shot him twice. Yeah. And also a little gossip. There was I believe at the Taste of Chicago, there was a 27-year-old singer who performed yesterday, female, and in the audience was no other than the FBI director, Kash Patel, who is 46. And right before her performance, he was summoned to the White House.
Yeah, I read about that. Kash Patel wanted to take, I assume, one of the FBI jets because he was going to go to where his girlfriend was performing. And literally, he was in the jet. The jet was on the tarmac. And he got a call from the White House that he was to drop everything and be there with bells on. So let's just hope, not that whoever Trump nominates to replace him won't be worse, but let's just hope that this joke of a man is fired.
We'll see. All right. Thank you much. All right.
Thanks. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that very, very much. Somebody is texting in. I told you that the actor Sam Neill has died. He was in Jurassic Park. He was in Nicole Kidman's first real hit movie, Dead Calm. He was in The Piano. He was in a lot of television shows like Peaky Blinders. Somebody texted in, Sam Neill was also a wine producer. His company was called Two Paddocks in New Zealand. He was actually born in Ireland before he lived in New Zealand. His mom was Irish. His dad was a New Zealander. And after he was born in Ireland, they moved to New Zealand. Yes, one of the obituaries of Sam Neill talked about this, how he had a big farm and a winery. And he was interviewed about it once. And he said basically that it requires an astounding amount of money to keep it going, but he loved doing it, and it occasionally provided him with enough alcohol to get tipsy. So there you go. Yes, Sam Neill did own a farm and winery in New Zealand. Let's go back to the phone lines. Phil is on the line from Crystal Lake. Hello, Phil. Thank you so much for the call today.
Hi, how you doing, Joan? I guess my question or statement is, if there's going to be a tax on all ships going through the strait, that would include the crude that's destined for our refineries that, we buy. So I don't see Shell or Exxon or anybody eating that cost. Wouldn't it seem that our fuel costs will go up by 20% or something?
Well, our fuel costs are going up because this is a global situation, but most of the crude oil that goes through the strait isn't actually intended for the United States. Most of it, the majority of it, goes to China with a few other countries. But, that's why you may have heard Donald Trump say in the past, it's not our problem. It's not our problem because, we don't need the crude that comes through the strait, but the rest of the world does. And let's face it, we're interconnected. And if that oil can't move, oil prices go up, gas prices go up, and that's how it affects us. It isn't it isn't that we need the crude that's coming through the strait ourselves.
Well, essentially, maybe not. However, whoever will pay the most will get, even though we drill here in, the Gulf of Mexico and, Texas and wherever, all that isn't destined for us. That goes overseas as well. We should have 50 cents a gallon gas or $1 a gas because it's all right here. Why ship it anywhere? But nobody's going to do that for us. I mean, and I don't even realistically think that they should. I think when our gas is under $2 or around $2, that seems cool. I mean,
is where you live? Is it $2?
You know what I mean? Well, I know, right? But think about what we paid when we were kids. You know what I mean? You'd get your buddies together, and you'd scrounge up a few bucks, and you'd go all night. Whatever. 50 years later, we're,
yeah.
2 or $3 doesn't seem horrible compared to, what my folks bought their house for compared to what my kids are trying to buy a house for.
Oh, tell me about it. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm frustrated and tired and exhausted like everybody else,
Yeah, we all are, aren't we, Phil? That's why I always say on Fridays that people have to find out something to do that is just joyful, that distracts from politics, distracts from the news of the day, and reminds us what we're fighting for. Because otherwise, it is exhausting.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're empty nesters, and we've got a good group of local friends, and everybody thinks the same. So, I mean, any conversation, even at home, is great when, you're all on board, So we have that.
Yeah, we do. Phil, thank you so
thank
much.
you.
I really
have
appreciate
it.
Thank you. I appreciate the call. Somebody texted in that Sam Neill was Agent Smith in the movie The Matrix. That was actually Hugo Weaving. Sam Neill wasn't in any of the Matrix movies. He was in The Hunt for Red October. He was in Jurassic Park. By the way, as I was reading all the different obits about Sam Neill, you know how he played the doctor, in charge of the park where the dinosaurs are in Jurassic Park? That role, Steven Spielberg originally offered that role to Harrison Ford. But for whatever reason, he turned it down, and Sam Neill got it. But I think Sam Neill was a delight in that particular role. So he wasn't in the Matrix movies, but he had tons and tons of film and television credits. When you start to read through his obituary and they name some of the stuff, you're like, oh my God. This is a guy who had quite a career. By the way, Andy just sent me a text. We've been talking about the passing of Lindsey Graham and the fact that Trump may be crippling the Republican Party in South Carolina a little bit, because Trump has said very publicly he wants Lindsey Graham's sister, Darlene, to finish out Lindsey Graham's term from now till January, because Lindsey really loved her. But Lindsey was up for re-election in January, and if the governor were able to put whoever the Republicans want in that race in the seat now, it would give them a leg up. You know, they would get to actually do the job, to show people they could do the job. And so now the governor of South Carolina has to decide, do I snub Donald Trump and put somebody in there who's good for the Republican Party of South Carolina? Or do I go along with what Donald Trump has asked me to do and potentially not take advantage of this chance to introduce somebody to the public? Either way, it looks like Dr. Annie Andrews, who is the Democrat choice to run for Senate in South Carolina, it looks like my guess is the governor's going to go along with what Donald Trump wants, because he's a vindictive toddler who will throw a tantrum if the governor of South Carolina dares to embarrass him. So they will squander an opportunity to give somebody a higher profile, and Annie Andrews will have a better shot. By the way, Annie Andrews, the Democratic nominee to take over the South Carolina Senate seat that is up for election in January, Annie Andrews is going to be talking with Richard Chu tomorrow. So if you want to hear her, I'm sure they'll talk about Lindsey and what his death does or doesn't do for the race. And she will be on with Richard Chu, who, of course, does his show from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., Monday through Friday, here on WCPT. Let's see, do I have time to do this? Yes, I do. Good. As I said, later today, I'm going to be talking with... oh, that's right. I'm sorry. The election is in November. The new senator takes their seat in January. Sorry. So whoever is appointed will still be in the seat till January, when whoever's newly elected will be there. There was a conference in London where it was a United Kingdom conference on defense. And the Minister of Defense is a guy by the name of Alistair Cairns. And he spoke at the conference. And he talked about NATO and how NATO has changed. I want to talk about this with Joel Ostro, but I want you to listen to Al Cairns right now.
I think the reason the NATO summit was so successful is because every leader went to NATO being briefed on how close we are to a significant escalation. And so they have all come away being more positive than they were perhaps on the last one, because they recognize the threat and the moment of time that we're in. And I think that's from a US side, and I think it's across all the European allies. And so whilst we look at NATO and we go, that was very positive, and it actually came away, I think, in a very good end state, read below the line that the reason it's come away as positive is because we live in probably the most dangerous time I've ever been in my 24 years in the military, but importantly, probably since the Cuban Missile Crisis, because Ukraine now is becoming unwinnable for Russia. And so think about it and I'd be really interested in your views from a Russian perspective, in the silo sat in Moscow. And then we sort of think to ourselves, so what happens if there is a ceasefire, if there is an agreement, if the war finishes? If you're sat in Moscow, you have 2 million people involved in your defense industrial base, making weapon systems to feed this war, this machine that is absorbing a huge amount of cost, but they're in good employment. There are areas that have been redundant and sort of swathes of wasteland in Russia now, which are huge industrial heartlands. You have 1 million people coming off the front line that are wounded. You have 1 million people that are serving. You'll need to restock your military. But what do you do when that ends? Are you going to lay all those people off? where are you going to find you either go in an international arms race to try and sell your kit and equipment around the world, or you lay them off and you employ these military in another way. And so you maybe need a perpetual state of conflict and competition because your industrial and your economic base is sustaining it. And to change it takes years to move that baseline on. And then the question comes to what we should do. And I've been harping on about national resilience rather than defense, for the simple reason that we see, are we ready for war? And we think about war and the gains of territory, when in reality, actually, it's about protecting our ability to govern in a democratic way and ensuring our society is resilient. Because we are now under threat, and we are in some cases already in conflict in the influence space and in cyber, from multifaceted approaches across all sectors of society, from what you have on your phone here today, to the misinformation, to economics, to cyber, and of course, foreign fields as well. And then I think from the sort of second point is, we always say, is Europe ready for war? My view would be you need to be ready for consistent and continual competition across multiple domains. And war may be a part of that competition, but it will be geographically constrained because it can never escalate to nuclear, which is what's happening in Ukraine now.
I want to talk to Joel Ostro about this, the idea that Russia's entire economy now depends on continuing this war. That's fascinating to me, that, the munitions factories they've built, the people they've put to work, a military-industrial complex that is apparently the main economic engine. We're going to take a break for news. We'll be back with more after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
And I am very pleased to welcome back to our airwaves Chris Bury, longtime network news guy, one of the people at DePaul University who was in charge of shaping young minds to become the next generation of journalists. Chris, how has your summer been?
Well, we used to have this thing in the news business called the dog days of summer, and that's evaporated.
Mm-hmm.
Just another Monday and another just flood of news as you've been going over.
I vaguely remember
last
those
hour.
days when you would look around at one another and like, okay, well, what are we going to fill our newscasts with today? Because, there's nothing going on.
Right. And yeah, it's just, it's unbelievable in this second term that every minute there seems to be a new story. And happy Monday. Hey, we're still at war. Gas prices are going up. ICE has killed another legal resident, and a federal judge is throwing out another Trump settlement. So yeah, it's crazy.
Just another Monday. Oh, and as I texted you, it has apparently happened that the governor of South Carolina has named Lindsey Graham's sister, Darlene, to fill out the remaining months of his Senate term. That was just announced. She's been speaking. And I don't really know much about her, except for the fact that Donald Trump said that Lindsey really, really loved her. But I can only imagine that the governor feels this is a missed opportunity. I mean, I don't imagine that Darlene is going to be on the ballot for the Republican Party in South Carolina to actually be the senator. And whoever they did find now misses out on an opportunity to actually do the job and show people they could do the job. What do you think?
This kind of appears as if it was a done deal because, as you said, President Trump announced earlier today that he was backing Darlene, and then shortly thereafter, the Senate Majority Leader John Thune also said that he was backing her. And then the governor, McMaster, makes the announcement. So something tells me that this was pretty well orchestrated, and she must have been in on it like you. I don't know much about her. I mean, from just a quick search today, it appears her only government political experience is working on Lindsey Graham's campaigns, beginning with, earlier in his career running for Senate. I don't know if she was involved in his House campaigns way back when, but it's certainly a way to keep someone in the family as an interim candidate. But under South Carolina law, from what I read, there has to be a primary by August 11th for, November. So to me, the question is this something that she is going to jump into? Is she going to be on the primary ballot? Is she going to gather signatures? Or is she just going to fill her brother's seat until January and then let the Republicans, dish it out in the primary? That's what's not clear, at least now.
I thought it was interesting within it, it seemed to me very, very shortly after we all learned of Lindsey's death, Donald Trump was saying, oh, I have somebody in mind. It's too early to talk about it because, Lindsey just died, but I have somebody in mind. It sounds like, Donald Trump made this decision pretty quickly.
Yes, that is pretty remarkable that he already, seemed to have a candidate, and who knows the backstory. Certainly he had probably met Darlene at numerous events. But like I said, she doesn't appear to have much government or political experience right now, of course, with all in South Carolina, where Lindsey Graham was very popular. There's certainly an outpouring of support for his family, and this is probably one of those interim measures that is going to, be politically satisfying to the Republicans in South Carolina while they kind of figure out who their candidate for governor is going to be. And that could be pretty wild. I mean, Nancy Mace is talking about jumping in,
because she did so well in her last race. I believe she was fifth or fourth. And McMaster himself, who, by the way, also is a big favorite of Donald Trump, has been hinting that he could jump into the race, or people on his staff have been. So, we'll have to see whether. There are others too. There's a congressman there, Russell Fry, Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette, who also didn't do very well in the previous primary, but she's another MAGA favorite. So it's going to be an interesting primary, and I think you raised a really good question in your last segment, which is what impact is this going to have on the Democratic candidate? Whether does Annie Andrews benefit from this, or is South Carolina now going to be so swept up in the Graham funeral and so on, and strong feelings that in a solidly red state, whether she's going to have more of a chance? I think it's kind of early to know, but it's going to be some interesting shifting of the plates in South Carolina politics over the next couple of months. Well, one thing that I think would be a positive about Darlene saying that she was going to gather signatures and try to get on the ballot herself is at least it would take misogyny out of the race. If you've got a woman versus a woman in the final vote to who's going to be the senator. And I'm sorry, but, I think that misogyny, especially in red states, always plays a role. This belief that somehow, the idea of the trad wife, women should be at home. They should be taking care of the kids. They shouldn't be in these real high profile jobs. But if it's Darlene Graham Nordone versus Annie Andrews, well, we've taken the whole female thing out of it, as opposed to Annie Andrews running against a regular sort of, suited white Republican male.
Yeah, and the big X factor here is just going to be, how can a Democrat like Annie Andrews, even though she is a strong candidate. She's good on television. She's facile. She'll probably be terrific in debates. Whether she can overcome the structural advantages that Republicans have in South Carolina. I mean, even Nancy Mace, represents part of the most liberal part of South Carolina in that her district includes some of Charleston, and she's had no problem getting reelected. So it tells you kind of everything you want to know. I mean, you look at South Carolina, you've got Charleston and Savannah, Savannah, Georgia, I'm sorry. You have Charleston, and there's not much else there in terms of blue in the South Carolina map.
You know, it was interesting. I was reading in Politico this morning, before this announcement was made, that Politico was sort of predicting that Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evett would be given the nod to fill in for Lindsey Graham the rest of his term because, apparently McMaster, the governor, really, really likes her. Trump is supposedly liked her or maybe still does. I don't know. And she was seen as a real popular politician in South Carolina. So wonder how Pamela's feeling today.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that she is a Trump favorite. She also didn't fare terribly well in the most recent primary. So, in terms of her popularity, I think it's so soon on the heels of Lindsey Graham's death yesterday that, we just don't know how this is going to shake out. And we're still learning a lot about, how Lindsey Graham is viewed. And that seems to be a very complicated viewpoint depending on who's writing about it. There seems to be a sort of a Washington view of Lindsey Graham and then a view from outside Washington that's possibly not as polished. But it's, I think he's such a controversial legacy, someone who was once considered a good legislator among the three amigos, trying to get legislation accomplished in immigration and environment, and then 2016, where he says that Trump is going to be the death of the Republican Party and they'll deserve it until and then we've seen this just remarkable transformation where he apparently decided, according to every bit of reporting, that the only way for him to stay relevant and to be in the room where things happen was to completely abdicate his, previous principles and fall in line with Trump so that he could still be a powerful figure in Washington. So it's I would think, a really mixed legacy. Some people are going to have a much harsher view and some a rosier view. But in a way, he is emblematic of the kind of Republican who survived in Trump too, right? There was really no choice. If you went against Trump for anything, he was going to primary you. And, we saw that happen in Texas, and we saw it happen, in Kentucky, and we saw it happen with Tom Tillis. So Lindsey Graham obviously read that dynamic and said, hey, if I'm going to survive, I'm going to jump full force into the Trump pool.
It's interesting, though, because Trump is able to forgive some people and not forgive others. I mean, Bill Cassidy, yes. Okay, Bill Cassidy took a vote against him when he was up for impeachment. But Bill Cassidy did everything in his power to make it up to Trump, voting along Trump lines, like 99.1% of the time. But it didn't seem to be enough. And yet Lindsey Graham, J.D. Vance, they both said terrible things about Trump that he was somehow able to forgive. Chris, we need to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about the two different kinds of situations and why some people get forgiven and some people don't. Chris Bury and I will be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm talking with longtime network newsman Chris Bury. Chris, why do some people get forgiven by Donald Trump and embraced by Donald Trump. And some people, even for a one-time infraction, are primaried and basically blackballed out of Republican life. What's the difference, do you think?
The suck-up factor to me. I think those who are most willing to just completely prone themselves to Trump can survive, but others who have even subtle questions cannot. Look at Texas. To me, this is really the interesting example. John Cornyn, said some mildly disapproving things about Trump after January 6th. And he was a little slow to endorse Trump in 2024, although, of course, he eventually did. And since that time, he has been pretty fawning of his relationship with Trump, pretty fawning of the president, and very boastful of their close relationship. And yet, after a lot of teasing, which you could argue was sort of cruel teasing, Trump dumps Cornyn in favor of Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, who was even more rabid. I guess he had no pauses in his history of supporting Trump. So, that's just one example. I think for the others, it's tough. For two of them, of course, for Massey in Kentucky, it was the Epstein factor. Trump, anybody who would not support Trump and who insisted on releasing the Epstein files, they were immediately persona non grata. That's why Marjorie Taylor Greene left Congress. That's why Massey, left Congress. So I think there were just red lines there that if you cross Trump, he is going to be vindictive, and he's going to try to get you out. And you got to say it's worked. His record is pretty strong in terms of his primary choices overwhelmingly have won in the second term. He's got a pretty good record.
You mentioned Thomas Massey, and it was speculated that if indeed we discovered Mitch McConnell was dead, that Thomas Massey might run for that Senate seat out of Kentucky. Now, all of a sudden, we see a smiling Mitch McConnell sitting up in his hospital room, holding a newspaper like a hostage to make sure we know what date it is, with a smiling wife sitting beside him. But for a month, there wasn't a single word. And when you're older, you're really sensitive to the weaknesses you experience as you age, and you really don't want to talk about it. Seriously, 1 month where there wasn't even so much as a rumor of what was going on? I find that totally bizarre.
It is completely bizarre, especially for someone who knows the game as well as McConnell, who is one of the craftiest, most wily practitioners of politics in modern American history. For McConnell and his staff not to engage in some kind of public comment on his health, it just doesn't pass the basic test. And still unanswered after the statement are some of the facts that were reported, such as that when the EMTs arrived at McConnell's home in Washington, D.C., that according to the audio dispatch, that he was unconscious and had apparently suffered some kind of cardiac event. Now, this new statement said, no, he just fell and he's in rehab, and there was no stroke and there was no cardiac event. But the whole thing is very, very odd, especially from someone who is such a pro, and his staff traditionally has been highly skilled and professional. So something is weird here. And, I don't want to jump into the conspiracy pool, but we certainly don't know the backstory yet.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. We've seen or heard the 911 call, which made it sound like somebody was in cardiac arrest, though clearly from the video one of the neighbors took, they were not doing any kind of CPR when they brought him out to the ambulance. But it is completely bizarre and frankly not very believable. You have a fall, the EMTs come to take you to the hospital, get checked out. What's the big deal? Oh, I fell and now I'm getting a bunch of tests to make sure that, I didn't break anything, which I didn't. And isn't this great? And he's in the hospital for a month just for a fall. Not without multiple broken bones. It doesn't make any sense.
And the one still paper with the conspicuously placed, Washington Post with the date on it. If in fact he's in rehab, but he's okay, why not even a short video? Let the people of Kentucky see that he's in rehab, but otherwise he's okay, and he will eventually be fit enough to serve as their senator until his term expires in January. It seems pretty clear that when Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky was basically threatening to call a special election if McConnell didn't come up and show that he was, as you said, proof of life, the governor was, making noises that he was going to call a special election. And only then did that photo come out. Was it yesterday or the day before? It was yesterday, I think. No, it was the day before, Saturday, of him, sitting in there with his wife, Elaine Cho.
So, yeah, it's, but I don't know. Do you think we will ever find out what really happened? Because as you say, Mitch McConnell is very, very canny and very cagey. His staff knows what to do, and if not, they will do whatever he wants them to do. I'm guessing that we're not going to find out what really happened, at least if McConnell stays healthy. Now, if there's another incident, if he has another quote unquote fall anytime soon, then I think that somebody's going to have to come clean.
I think at some point, who knows when, and it may not be until after the November election, we'll probably find out what really happened. These sorts of secrets tend not to last. People in Washington are notorious gossips, and somebody knows something. Nothing stays secret very long. It's the leakiest town in the United States. So, yeah, I do think we're going to find out something, but maybe not until after the election.
And over the weekend, speaking of, people in Washington speculating and chatting, over the weekend, we started to see what I consider conspiracy theories about Lindsey Graham's death, because he just went to Ukraine and he decided that he thought the United States should really get behind Ukraine in bigger and better than ever before. And then he dies. It must have been what? Russia? Russia did it.
Well, I got to tell you, Kash Patel didn't help, right? Kash Patel, for whatever reason, puts out a statement on social media saying that, the full resources of the FBI are going to be available. And all that did was throw kerosene on the conspiracy bonfire. It's like, why would the FBI, if he died of, a heart failure and a break in the aorta, which is, it's not an unusual thing for a man of his age who has a, family history of, I guess his father also.
His father only lived to 69 and died very suddenly.
Yeah. And so and why would the FBI director, put out a statement talking about, we're standing by if there wasn't anything wrong? To me, it was just Kash Patel wanting to get his name in the media. That's my guess, but it just wasn't a very smart thing to do.
How much longer is Donald Trump going to put up with the antics of Kash Patel?
You didn't go see his girlfriend perform in Chicago over the weekend at the Great Smokeout? I'm shocked you weren't down there.
I was not there.
Yeah, good question. I think there was a little bit of misreporting, though, going on about, there was this report on MS Now that he was summoned to the White House, and that's why he couldn't accompany his girlfriend to Chicago. But it turns out it looks like the real reason was that he was called in to coordinate the FBI serving subpoenas to the homes of 4 New York Times reporters. And that, again, that's something that is, I mean, completely outrageous to have the White House calling the FBI director to the White House to mount what was obviously a politically orchestrated investigation of serving subpoenas. And, and that appears to be the real reason why Patel was called to the White House last week.
I want to talk to you more about what you just mentioned, the subpoenas that went out to New York Times reporters. I'm speaking with longtime network newsman, DePaul, former journalist in residence, Chris Bury. Will be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Joining me is Chris Bury, longtime network newsman. And you may have been reading about this. Donald Trump is going after New York Times reporters, and the New York Times has told each and every one of those reporters, like, don't you worry, we've got your back. We are taking this to the mat. ABC recently, after Brendan Carr was like, well, I don't know about The View, they shouldn't be talking to politicians, ABC put up a QR code on the television set and said, you know what, you need to tell the FCC that you want Brendan Carr and the FCC to leave ABC alone. Here's the QR code. Photograph it with your phone, and it'll tell you exactly how to make your voice heard. Do I dare believe that this is the beginning of some real pushback against the Trump administration?
I certainly hope so. I do think this latest round of grand jury subpoenas to New York Times reporters is one of the most outrageous things that the Trump administration has done with the media. Just to kind of review for your listeners, this has to do with the New York Times reporting that the jet that was gifted from the government of Qatar to Donald Trump, to President Trump, to the United States, and was sort of hastily, fitted out to be Air Force One, apparently didn't have the correct, security defenses to fly out of Turkey after the summit, because Turkey shares a border with Iran, and the Secret Service was worried. Pretty straightforward. The president, when asked why he wasn't flying out on the Qatari gift jet, said that it was a chance to send the gift jet to an airbase in Britain so that people on the base could look at it. Well, that was just a ridiculous, made-up lie. And so the next day, the New York Times reports this story about what really happened, which is the Secret Service said, hey, we got a war going on. You've just ordered more strikes. And this jet does not have the anti-missile capability or secure communication ability to be used in the event of an attack. And so you really shouldn't fly it. And so they brought in the old Air Force One and flew it to Britain. And then he got on the Qatari gift jet and flew home. So this is all just basic factual reporting. And what does the DOJ do at Trump's request? They send FBI agents to the homes of these reporters who have been compelled to testify in federal court Wednesday in Manhattan.
Absolutely. And in addition to the reporting you talked about, it was reported quite widely, and this wasn't challenged by anybody, that Israeli security forces, they didn't have a confirmed threat, but they had heard some chatter that somehow the Iranians or someone else might be targeting Trump as he left in his Qatari plane. That wasn't confirmed, and some people have speculated that it was Benjamin Netanyahu's effort to kind of get Trump back on board the let's go after Iran train. But, nobody stood up and said, well, that's not true. The Israelis never said that. So the Israelis tell you that there is potentially a credible threat against you. And so you switch to a more secure plane. What is so embarrassing about that? Is it the embarrassment, the fact that he apparently insisted on flying his brand new toy, even though it wasn't up to snuff? I don't get it.
Well, it's so typical. It's a way to deflect, okay? Somebody screwed up. The jet wasn't ready. The former Air Force director of the Air Force One program said, I believe in the New York Times, that it would take several years to equip the Qatari plane with all the anti-missile defenses that Air Force One already has. So basically, the president rushed this jet, this luxurious jet. You've seen the photos of the inside. It looks like something out of a king's palace. Rushed this jet into service when it wasn't properly outfitted. And once that's reported and his lie about it is exposed, he doesn't take responsibility. Instead, he tries to intimidate the reporters who wrote the story with some, and apparently the FBI called the New York Times or called the reporters the night before the story was going to come out and said, please don't publish it, but only gave like a vague, in the interest of national security. Well, and this is something that I talk to my students about. We have a very, very historic Supreme Court decision called the U.S. versus New York Times, a.k.a. the Pentagon Papers case, which said the government may not tell the news media not to publish something unless there is a, quote, clear and present danger to U.S. national security. That's the phrase. Well, this was the day after he was already out of Turkey in Britain. So the time, there was no possible way that this was any exposure of the president. The story came out after he was already back in the U.S. or on the way back. So the idea that invoking some kind of national security, my guess is a judge is going to throw this out. This just seems to be pure intimidation on its face.
So we have ABC fighting back, the New York Times saying that this is ridiculous, we're going to fight it. But there's a reporter for the Washington Post who has been refusing a court order to reveal her sources, which kind of, you're the teacher, seems like journalism 101 to me. But the courts have imposed, I believe it's an $800 a day fine as long as she doesn't reveal her sources. I've not read where the Washington Post has said, oh, yeah, we've got your back, babe. We're going to take this, all through the court system. I don't know. Maybe they're doing that and I've missed it. But it kind of seems to me that she's been, let's just put this kindly, that she has not been supported by her organization, the Washington Post, the way a journalist would hope to be supported. What do you know about that situation?
I just know that the FBI, went to her home, seized her computers, seized a phone, and that I think that she may have gotten them back, but I don't know to what extent the Post attorneys are supporting her. I would hope that they do. I know that when I was at ABC News, we could count on our news organization and the attorneys to fight for us if anything came up. But there was never this kind of intimidation. When you mentioned, the fine that she's being, it sort of reminded me of the Judith Miller case, way back when in the Bush administration, when she was a diplomatic reporter for the New York Times and she went to jail rather than reveal the name of the source who was smearing Ambassador Joe Wilson and his wife. The source was Scooter Libby, who was Dick Cheney's chief of staff. But Judith Miller sat in court for quite a while until finally, the source agreed, okay, I'm going to release you from this. But, so this has happened in other administrations. But the veneer of, some kind of law enforcement behind it is the scary thing. And this was, this was ordered by the U.S. attorney in, Southern District of New York, who is Trump's new nominee to be Director of National Intelligence. And his hearing is coming up this week, too, so that should be interesting.
Oh, good God. And, CNN was playing a clip from Hegseth where he's talking about, a new task force. He's going to root out all these leaks and everybody's going to be prosecuted. And his statement appeared to be geared somewhat to the New York Times reporters that they don't care about national security. They are putting this country at risk and we've got to stop it. Which, do you think anybody's going to buy that argument?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's so clear that from, the Pete Hegseth administration that the only version of events that they want out to the American people and to the world are Pentagon press releases. That's it. I mean, they kicked the reporters, the mainstream reporters out of the Pentagon. They've, the news conferences turned into these just ridiculous show and tells with sympathetic news organizations. The New York Times and Wall Street Journal and Washington Post and even to their credit, Fox News, all have terrific Pentagon reporters with excellent sources deep into the military and the military leadership. They're going to continue to report the facts. And, Pete Hegseth is coming off looking, pretty silly in all this because he's got a war to fight. And to worry about a couple of leaks that come out in the news media is really something that a secure Secretary of Defense wouldn't have to worry about.
Yeah, he's a clown. I think Donald Trump likes him and likes Ken Paxton because, Donald Trump's big argument when somebody tries to talk to him about some sort of misbehavior or corruption, everybody does it. Everybody does it. We all know everybody does it. So you can't hold me to some kind of special standard. So I think he likes the fact that Hegseth has been credibly accused of rape. I think he likes the fact that Ken Paxton is a reprehensible human being on every front, because I think he feels that it goes to prove his premise. Everybody does it. Everybody's awful. So I'm no different than anybody else. And you can't hold me to a different standard. What do you think?
No, I agree with that. If everybody is corrupt, then they're all corrupt. And there's no difference between any of the candidates, and the Democrats were the deep state. And by the way, I'm going to blame it on Biden and Obama. It's just, it's a pretty transparent playbook, but I think it has had some effect of hurting the credibility of the media. I think that's been a very clear strategic objective of both Trump terms, but it's on steroids in the second term, as you mentioned, going after ABC and the New York Times and the lawsuits against 60 Minutes. And, the problem is that some of the big media organizations capitulated early. I mean, 60 Minutes gave in to a ridiculous lawsuit. ABC gave in and settled another lawsuit that had very little chance of going anywhere. And so I think through their cowardice, the media organizations have invited even more, even more harassment, even more intimidation. But I am glad to see that ABC is now standing up, trying to stand up to this FCC chairman Brendan Carr, who has absolutely no business dictating the content of television talk shows. So I'm delighted that Disney is doing that, and hats off to the New York Times. Who has a terrific attorney, by the way, very highly respected. David
that
McCraw,
First Amendment. I read about him. He specializes in First Amendment cases. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a strong, tough attorney. And so, again, that's great. It's long overdue.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Chris Bury and I are going to take a break, but we will be back with much more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm talking to longtime network newsman Chris Bury. And Chris, I was catching up on the text line. There is widespread disbelief in my text line that was a legitimate picture of Mitch McConnell. One person texted in that they posted a bunch of pictures that it's the same outfit he was wearing in a picture from 2023. And who wears jeans while they're in a hospital bed? I wouldn't believe anything, pictures, recordings, anything, only live as it happens. And I don't think we're going to see that. It does seem odd that the doctors that take care of him didn't know that he had health problems. You know, this text line, my audience is usually reasonably conspiracy theory free. So if my audience is going nuts about this, I have a feeling that this is something that we are going to be hearing more and more and more of in the very near future. I don't know.
Yeah, they got some questions. They got some questions to answer. I'm not ready to jump into the conspiracy stuff until we know more. And you know, frankly, McConnell has been very traditional in his media dealings. He's had a staff. One of them is famously a cable commentator now, Scott Jennings, who worked for McConnell for many years. So it does seem really, truly weird. Is it fake? It doesn't kind of match with McConnell's history. That's all I know.
I have a procedural question, and you may not have the answer to this. The governor of South Carolina has said Lindsey Graham's sister is going to fill out the rest of his term till January. Lindsey Graham was on the committee that is going to be looking at the first go round of whether or not Todd Blanche should be confirmed as the head of the DOJ. Does John Thune reassign people to committees to fill in that chair with somebody experienced, or does Darlene automatically get seated on the Judiciary Committee? Do you know? I'm not sure about that.
I don't think that Darlene would get that seat.
It doesn't seem right,
I'm not
does
100% sure. I mean, I think it would go to, my guess is it would go to the next senior, majority Republican there. So, I don't know. While we're sitting here, let me just see if there's an answer here while we're on the air.
I can't imagine that some newbie who's, even if it were an experienced politician, I mean, that's a...
Oh, it's not going to be a newbie. It's going to be the oldest oldie in the Senate, Chuck Grassley.
Oh.
So Grassley is going to be acting as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and he's going to preside over the Blanche hearing. So, yeah, that makes sense because he would be next in line there. So, we're gonna have Chuck Grassley in charge here, and that should be pretty entertaining / interesting.
Yeah, he's a colorful kind of guy. That at least, I find him to be. MS Now is reporting that Donald Trump has announced that he's going to be speaking to the nation this coming Thursday, 8 o'clock Central Time. And there are reports that Donald Trump is going to take this opportunity to talk about the fact that there was foreign election interference in 2020. And he doesn't seem to think there was any foreign interference before that. Mueller report apparently was never put in front of him, or maybe he just doesn't read. But apparently Bill Pulte, the guy who's currently filling in as head of intelligence, the guy who comes from the housing area, who knows housing. Yeah, and now he's in charge of intelligence. There's reporting that somehow he's going to declassify documents that prove there was foreign interference, because we all know Donald Trump should have won directly for a second term, right, Chris?
This is just truly astounding. So much of this administration's efforts have been to support the delusion that Donald Trump won the 2020 election, which, of course, He did not. This is just strikes me as another one of these ridiculous things. Bill Pulte, who is the heir to a house building company that his father ran, who has no background in national security, could never be confirmed as director of national intelligence, that he's going to be involved in this, along with Mark Wayne Mullen.
Oh, God, the head of the plumbing company.
DHS. Yeah, this is just, but I think politically it's also interesting is like the U.S. is headed into midterms. Does the Trump White House really think that raising his delusional idea that he somehow won an election that he clearly, legally, and squarely lost is an important issue when inflation is high and housing is difficult? And I mean, to think that this is worth a primetime address, I'm not even sure the networks would carry this. I can't imagine actually why they would.
No,
because it sounds like something that's pretty blatantly political. But I do wonder what country he is talking about. My guess is it's China, but I don't know that. I haven't seen that reported.
He doesn't seem to care at all about doing anything to help Republicans in the midterm. He truly does not. And I guess we shouldn't be surprised by that, because he's one of these people where it's always all about him. It's not about the country. It's not about politics. It's not about anything else. It's all about him. And I've got to believe that Mike Johnson and John Thune are just in private, that they're just putting their heads in their hands and sobbing, because not only is he not helping them, he seems to be actively doing and saying things that will hurt his party in the midterms. What do you think about this?
Well, there's no question about it. I mean, he refused to sign the bipartisan housing bill, one of the only accomplishments across both aisles that Republicans and Democrats in the Senate agreed on, and Trump refused to sign it out of pure petulance. And in so doing, he described housing as a, quote, yawn. I mean, housing is obviously one of the most important things to people because it's so unaffordable in so much of the country, but it's just a yawn. It's just the way affordability is a hoax. So to focus on the 2020 election in July of 2026 seems to be politically tone deaf, but it's not surprising. I mean, we've just seen reports that the FBI director, Kash Patel, had hundreds of FBI agents looking over the
Paul, did we lose Chris? Hey, Paul, or hey, Chris, you dropped out. Could you check to make sure you didn't accidentally mute yourself? Okay. I'm going to send him a text. Should he reconnect, Paul? You're in charge. Tell us what to do. Okay. We were talking about the fact that Donald Trump is making, it's just been announced that he's going to make it an address to the nation this coming Thursday evening, and it will be 8 o'clock Central Time. Is he going to talk about the war in Iran? No, he's not going to talk about that. Is he going to talk about his idea to close the Strait of Hormuz? No, actually, he's not going to talk about that. Is he going to talk about the death of his good friend, Lindsey Graham? No, he's not going to talk about that either. He is going to be joined by Bill Pulte, who is really, even among the idiots Trump has brought in to lead departments, Bill Pulte is, he really stands out. He and Bill Pulte are going to try to convince the country that Joe Biden beat him because of foreign interference, even though he willfully ignores the Mueller report that clearly states there was interference the time that he won. Hey, Paul, do you have a phone number for Chris Beery? He says his internet just quit. Hey, Chris, if you can hear me, answer your phone. Okay, answer your phone. You know what's going to happen? We're going to get him right when it's time to go to news, because it's pretty close to what's getting ready to go to news right now. Okay, let's just figure we're not going to get Chris back unless Paul Shivari can pull some kind of miracle. So coming up, we are going to be speaking with political science professor Joel Ostro. I shared a soundbite from the defense minister of the UK speaking at a London conference. I believe the remarks were on July 9th. And he pointed out something that I've never thought of before, that regardless of the fact that it appears that Russia has been stymied militarily by Ukraine, they perhaps economically can't afford for the war to stop. They have built factories to create munitions. They have basically created a war economy. And what's going to happen, unless the guy from the United Kingdom said, unless they can somehow create a market and start selling all of these munitions elsewhere, what's going to happen if these factories are no longer needed? What's going to happen if the millions of people working in these factories no longer have jobs? What is that going to do to the economy? In other words, is it possible that Vladimir Putin can't afford economically to stop this war? We are going to take a break for news. We're going to talk to political science professor Joel Ostro about that and more right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I want to talk about the situation with Ukraine and Russia, but I want to share with you something that I played at the top of the show. There was a conference in London last week, a UK defense conference. Alistair Cairns, or Al Cairns, is the defense minister. And he gave a statement about where NATO is and where Russia is. He says in this soundbite that NATO's kind of doing better than ever, but that means, it's because there's a bigger threat than ever before. He also says that Vladimir Putin's economy in Russia is now hugely dependent on the war. It is a wartime economy. And if Vladimir Putin agrees to some kind of ceasefire or end, what does that mean for the millions of people who have jobs because of this wartime economy? I want to share this with you again. Again, this is the UK Defense Minister, Alistair Cairns, speaking at a defense conference in London last week. Listen to this.
I think the reason the NATO summit was so successful is because every leader went to NATO being briefed on how close we are to a significant escalation. And so they have all come away being more positive than they were perhaps on the last one, because they recognize the threat and the moment of time that we're in. And I think that's from a US side, and I think it's across all the European allies. And so whilst we look at NATO and we go, that was very positive, and it actually came away, I think, in a very good end state, read below the line that the reason it's come away as positive is because we live in probably the most dangerous time I've ever been in my 24 years in the military, but importantly, probably since the Cuban Missile Crisis, because Ukraine now is becoming unwinnable for Russia. And so think about it and I'll be really interested in your views from a Russian perspective, in the silo sat in Moscow. And then we sort of think to ourselves, so what happens if there is a ceasefire, if there is an agreement, if the war finishes? If you're sat in Moscow, you have 2 million people involved in your defense industrial base, making weapon systems to feed this war. This machine is absorbing a huge amount of cost, but they're in good employment. There are areas that have been redundant and sort of swathes of wasteland in Russia now, which are huge industrial heartlands. You have 1 million people coming off the front line that are wounded. You have 1 million people that are serving. You'll need to restock your military. But what do you do when that ends? Are you going to lay all those people off? where are you going to find you either go in an international arms race to try and sell your kit and equipment around the world, or you lay them off and you employ these military in another way. And so you maybe need a perpetual state of conflict and competition because your industrial and your economic base is sustaining it. And to change it takes years to move that baseline on. And then the question comes to what we should do. And I've been harping on about national resilience rather than defense, for the simple reason that we see, are we ready for war? And we think about war and the gains of territory, when in reality, actually, it's about protecting our ability to govern in a democratic way and ensuring our society is resilient. Because we are now under threat, and we are in some cases already in conflict in the influence space and in cyber, from multifaceted approaches across all sectors of society, from what you have on your phone here today, to the misinformation, to economics, to cyber, and of course, foreign fields as well. And then I think from the sort of second point is, we always say, is Europe ready for war? My view would be you need to be ready for consistent and continual competition across multiple domains. And war may be a part of that competition, but it will be geographically constrained because it can never escalate to nuclear, which is what's happening in Ukraine now.
I am joined by political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. He is an expert on all things Russia. Joel, what do you think about that? That Russia cannot economically afford to end the war against Ukraine?
Well, hi, Joan. It's good to be on with you again. And I know you have me on a lot because I tend to lack strong opinions on the issues that I care about.
Yeah, you're
I do
a real
try to back them
wishy-washy
up.
kind of guy.
Yeah, I'm a wishy-washy kind of guy. I do try to back them up whenever possible, and I think usually with evidence or logic. This dude is the defense minister for the UK.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're forming a new government. If he's ever the finance minister or the economics minister, there will no longer be a United Kingdom. I'm sorry, that's one of the most idiotic arguments I have ever heard from a government official. And that's saying a lot if you think about who our own government officials are. You just played the idiocy coming out of the Secretary of State's mouth regarding fees for shipping through the Straits of Hormuz. Look, this war has been an unmitigated disaster for the Russian economy, by all accounts. So, gosh, there's so many ways to argue this. Okay, number one, there's about 1.5 million people catastrophically wounded, something like 370,000 Russians dead. They have something like 2 million people in their armed forces now during this war effort. Russia's economy has always had a large military-industrial complex, as has our own. But now their economy is about 60%, by most accounts, oriented towards military production. Who finances that industry? Government spending, right?
Mm-hmm.
And who purchases the products of those things? The government, right?
Right.
And then a bomb goes, or a rocket is launched, or a bomb is exploded. How much use is that afterwards?
None.
Correct. Okay. This war is devastating the Russian economy. All production efforts have some connection to this war. And, food production, they got to feed all those soldiers. And, by the way, all those people in those occupied territories, which also counts, and by most accounts, towards that war effort, that funding. Yeah, people are employed, but there's global sanctions regime against Russian exports. When the war ends, do you think they're not going to produce anything? When the war ends and eventually the sanctions end, will there be no investment flowing into the Russian economy? I could go on and on. This is the most moronic statement I've heard in a long, long time.
So what happens if he is to be believed? There's all these factories employing gajillions of people, And so what happens if there's no more war?
You know, the hilarious thing is they're going to probably be less able to sell arms because this war is demonstrating how inefficient and low tech, unreliable their weapon systems are. Whether we're talking about air defense, look at all the Ukrainian missiles and drones getting through, and look at the ease with which Ukraine is wiping out Russia's air defense and guidance systems and all the rest. So if anything, when the war ends, Ukraine's economy is going to have a boom because everyone's going to want their technology and their products. But yeah, Russia's economy is on a war footing. Did the United States economy was on a war footing during the Second World War, was it not?
Yeah.
I don't think our economy fell apart after the war.
Well, a lot of women who had been involved in those jobs got summarily kicked to the curb so that the returning soldiers.
Would be psyched about that. But you know, the Russian economy, it will pivot and it will go back to what it was normal before. It's not like the people it's employing towards the military effort now were unemployed before. Oh, it's just there's been a shift in production. They'll shift again. And it'll shift again to much more productive and economically
but his argument was that, yes, it could shift again, but that wouldn't be something that would happen quickly. It would take years, and that Russia basically would flounder until that took place.
Yeah, this war is having a devastating negative impact on the Russian economy and, you know, obviously on Ukraine as well. Lots of things being destroyed. Look, Ukraine has wiped out like 40% of Russia's oil and gas production. In 1 week, Ukraine has destroyed or immobilized 105 Russian ships operating in the Azov and Black Seas. You know, these are commercial ships, things that, you know, they're shadow fleets that are trying to export oil and gas, but also military ships. Like there's going to have a lot of productive need in Russia after this war. Bridges being destroyed, factories being destroyed. Like there's going to be a lot of construction going on, just as will be in Ukraine. That's why Jared Kushner's salivating over it.
Because he thinks he's going to get a piece of that?
And Witkoff, yeah. That's the only reason they're siding with Russia, is they want a piece of the rebuild.
So you disagree with him that Russia can't afford to stop this war? By all accounts,
I disagree with him so much that it's impossible to listen to him again.
Okay. All righty.
He should stick to talking about military issues. It sounds like he has some expertise on that, but he should stay away from the economic stuff.
Okay. I want to talk more about this, but we need to take a break. I'm talking to political science professor Joel Ostro. We will be back with more after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by political science professor Joel Ostro from Benedictine University. He is an expert on all things Russia. Okay, let me bring you up to speed on all the different things that I've been reading about the Ukraine war. Ukraine is making masterful use of their drones. They are going after oil production in Russia and really cramping their style. Russia is making very little progress in its effort to claim more and more Ukrainian territory. And in fact, in some places, Ukraine is recovering a little bit of territory. Plus, they've also been using their drones to attack Crimea, which is kind of an interesting wrinkle to this war. And I've read that should the United States give them the blueprints to build their own like Patriot batteries, because we're not going to give them apparently Patriots, but we might tell them how to make them, that could be the turning point, and that Ukraine could actually win this war. That's pretty much everything that I've been reading. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with?
Maybe we should start with the last one. So first of all, the license would be to produce Patriot interceptors, the rockets that are part of those Patriot batteries. To my understanding, that they're not going to be producing whole Patriot systems. To give you an idea, this has nothing to do with any kind of turning point in this war. Japan and Germany are the other two countries that have such licenses. Germany got the license, I believe I read it was 4 years ago. They have produced a grand total of, let me count, 0 Patriots.
When you say license, do you mean the plans, the blueprints? If I license my name, and you sell, chocolate bars,
I get to make a new Joan Esposito.
You get to say there's a Joan Esposito chocolate bar, but Joan Esposito didn't really tell you how to make the chocolate bar.
No, exactly. So they would license a company to produce the rockets. And Japan got this license. It took them 2 years before they could roll a single of their first interceptor off the shelves. It's going to be at least, even under the best of circumstances, it'll be a year. There's more than 20 different suppliers of parts that go into just the interceptors alone. So whatever company gets the license then needs to subcontract for all of these components to other companies that will produce them or to purchase them from others. That takes a long time. There's already whispers that Ukraine has got in place the company that they would authorize to do the production, and they're trying to strike deals with some of those Japanese subcontractors for parts. The more that Ukraine's operation would be assembly rather than manufacturing, the faster and more reliable, because they've already been tested, these things will be. The rosiest scenario is a year after the license is granted. It's probably more like 18 months. Meanwhile, Russia's missiles are still battering Ukrainian cities, and the prospect of this going on for another 18 months is really hard to bear. So that leads to the other points. And Roman Sheremetyev is the guy I was quoting. He's a professor at Case Western University in Ohio, and he provided this information about the 105 Russian ships that Ukraine has destroyed with its drones. It's been going on for months. The planning of it has been going on for months, but this coordinated attack on the Russian ships is new. And Roman is right that this is a strategic choice that has been long planned out. So the first thing they did was they took out Russia's air defenses and their ability to strike back at these drones. They then cut off Crimea in particular, and they've really, Crimea has massive energy shortage, blackout. They've banned sales of oil and gas to civilians or severely limited it. Excuse me. Electricity is shut off for much of the day in Crimea. Russia's evacuating government officials and having them destroy or bring documents. Ukraine has effectively sealed it off. The whole point of this war for Russia was to create that land bridge through the Donbass area from mainland Russia to Crimea. By sealing off Crimea, Ukraine has really thwarted and destroyed Russia's entire purpose for this war. And people back home in Russia are starting to learn about this. Meanwhile, Ukraine has been battering military installations and the like across Crimea. That then has enabled them to unleash these attacks on the ships in the Black Sea and in the Azov Sea to great effect. Sort of stage 2 of what Zelensky has called the long-range sanctions. So Russia's ability to support Crimea is really been effectively reduced and continues to be by the day. They can't get supplies there because Ukrainian drones have eliminated a number of bridges and rail lines. There's really only one main road,
but
and Ukraine controls the southern part of it.
There's a whole port system there. Oh, can't they just bring supplies by ship to the ports?
No, the Ukraine's first attacks were against Russia's Black Sea Fleet. They had to evacuate because Ukraine destroyed those bases and was taking out their ships. So Russia has no Black Sea Fleet anymore on Crimea.
Oh.
Yes, they can't protect anything that they would bring. Yeah, it's been masterful use of these land, sea, and air drones. And you're right, Russia's making incremental, we're talking like maybe a couple kilometers a week in the eastern part of Ukraine, where they're gaining territory at the cost of 1,500 or so soldiers per day. So we're talking like 35 to 40,000 soldiers a month.
With how many casualties on the Ukrainian side?
Not nearly that. Not even close. A quarter, maybe less than that. Because Ukraine's using drones to take out these Russian troops largely. There are still casualties, don't get me wrong. But then Ukraine is making these gains in the south, which is, it almost makes pointless Russia's taking the territory above if they can't reach Crimea. And then at the same time, on a nightly basis, while Russia's launching these cruise missiles at Kyiv and Kherson and other Ukrainian cities, Ukraine is taking out oil and refineries and storage depots, ports dedicated to the export of oil and gas. Really, they're able to hit almost any part of Russia now because Ukraine has developed these long-range drones, and Russia can't shoot them down because Ukraine's technology has proven better at evading Russian radar. They fly low, they're quiet, they're disguised, to the point where nearly half of Russia's production capacity of oil and gas has been wiped out. Maybe you've seen the images of the long lines at gas stations, even in Moscow.
Yeah.
When I'm talking about long lines, people are waiting 20 hours.
As far as the eye can see.
Yeah, 20 hours people are waiting to try to fill up their vehicles with gas. I don't know what happens at the end of that 20 hours when the station is then out, which apparently happens regularly. So it's having this war is coming to the Russian people now in ways that it hasn't before.
But I thought...
And can I make one more point?
Sure.
And Ukraine still is meticulous at not targeting, Russian civilian targets. They are not targeting hospitals. They are not targeting apartment buildings. They are not targeting markets. They are not targeting schools. They are targeting weapons depots, military installations, and oil and gas production and transport facilities.
I was under the impression that things were at a stalemate. The situation you've just described sounds like Ukraine has the upper hand. Am I reading too much into that?
Ukraine, there's a stalemate, but it's not what you normally. It's not like it was earlier in the war when the stalemate, was on the front lines and it was, very close combat along trenches. Russia has the advantage in missile because Ukraine no longer has ballistic missile defense because they're out of Patriot interceptors. So Ukraine can shoot down Russia's drones, and they do quite effectively. Even when Russia sends hundreds and hundreds at a time, very few, and sometimes none, get through. But the missiles are getting through now and battering Ukrainian civilian facilities, installations, which Russia is intentionally targeting. They don't care what they hit. Russians don't care what they hit. They're a terrorist state. Ukraine is regaining territory and gaining the strategic upper hand by choking off Crimea and choking off Russia's ability to supply its military. In the winter, if they don't have oil and gas, those Russian soldiers in occupied Donbass are going to get really cold.
Interesting. We have to take a break, Joel, but when we come back, I want to talk to you more about Crimea. I know that Russia acquired Crimea quite some time ago. I believe Obama was president. And
2014.
Yeah, I want to ask you about Crimea and the people of Crimea and how well they are or are not involved in this situation. I also want to talk to you about the kinds of munitions, the drones that are being used in this Russia-Ukrainian conflict. I'm speaking with Joel Ostro, political science professor at Benedictine and an expert on Russia. We are going to continue our chat about where the current Ukraine-Russia conflict stands when we come right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
With me is political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. He is an expert on all things Russia, and we talk to him frequently about where things stand with this Russian war against Ukraine. I don't know much about Crimea, Joel. I mean, my geography, my history, these are all weak spots in my education. But
Merkin.
yeah. Tell me what I need to know about Crimea.
So why does Russia want it? Crimea provides access to the Black Sea, which then would provide the Russian shipping interests and the Russian military access to the whole world via the Black Sea. So their Black Sea fleet has always been important to Russia. At various points, look, this whole region of the world has had featured shifting political control, over the years. Russia, Prussia, Ukraine, Poland, so Crimea has not been immune from that. In terms of demographics, it's hard to believe any data that you read about Crimea over the last 20 years. Maybe before this version, before 2014, maybe 60% was ethnically Russian, 25 to 30% ethnically Ukrainian, 10 to 15% Crimean Tatar and or Muslim. There's no doubt that any statistics you see today are unreliable. The numbers of those labeled as Russian is grossly inflated because people have been forced to give up their Ukrainian passports, identity, and had Russian papers forced on them to be able to occupy their homes, to shop, to move from one place to another, to go to school, to work. So it's really hard to get accurate numbers. Certainly, many ethnic Ukrainians have fled. I personally know of a number of heart-wrenching stories. Family
from people in Crimea?
Family in Sevastopol that in 2014 sent their then 14-year-old daughter to Ukraine to live with a third cousin that she had never met. And then the war broke out there, and she was on her own at like 18. And she fled because she would have been gang raped by Russian soldiers that had entered her building in Kyiv. Those stories are not that uncommon. Many Ukrainians fled Crimea between 2014 and then certainly after the invasion in 2022, seeing the writing on the wall.
So Crimea, when you say it was a certain percentage Ukraine, a certain percentage Russian, are you just talking when you say ethnically? People who spoke a different language, or were these people who actually were born in Russia and somehow moved to Crimea, or they were already there when Crimea was put inside Ukraine, when those borders were drawn? Take me back to the very beginning. I'm confused.
The answer to your questions are yes. How's that?
All righty then.
Look, in Crimea, as in the eastern part of Ukraine, until the 2010s, virtually everyone spoke Russian and Ukrainian. Virtually everyone spoke Russian, and all those who identified as Ukrainian also spoke Ukrainian. Certainly by 2014, Ukrainians were no longer having their kids learning Russian. Became intensely political, even more than prior. But in Crimea, because the majority of the population remained Russian-speaking, and after 2014, to be able to exist, you have to speak Russian. So basically everyone there speaks Russian, but that doesn't make them Russian.
I get that. I'm with you so far.
That's all I got to say.
Okay. All right. Because I don't recall, I remember people saying that, when Russia invaded and declared that Crimea was theirs, that the rest of the world kind of was like, well, okay, like, we'll, as long as you promise not to cause any more trouble, we'll let you have Crimea. Was that pretty much what happened back then?
That was what, in retrospect, was the unfortunate deal of the Minsk Accords, brokered largely by then German Chancellor Angela Merkel, supported by the Obama administration and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. It was all, let's just say that I was outspoken against that approach in 2014. And it was singularly because of Germany's renewed dependence on Russia, on oil and gas for its economy.
So we sort of let it alone as a favor to Germany?
And the rest of Europe, but largely that, yes. Germany had been going green and going nuclear until the Fukushima disaster in Japan, and the German population, this was a political calculation made by Merkel's government, that the German population would turn heavily against new nuclear power plants. And they lacked the resolve to explain why their new plants would be safer and why the need was there. So they shifted back to gas, and they chose to partner with Putin, and the rest is history.
I understand what you're saying. I now understand why what happened, but has there been any time in the history of the world where appeasing a bully like this who wants more territory has actually worked? Okay, as long as you promise, you're not going to go after or anything else or behave badly anywhere else, we'll do this. It seems like that's always a strategy that backfires.
Yeah, and I've been saying that about Europe's reaction towards the Trump regime since we've started talking about that.
Well, it seems like that's a lesson they've finally learned. They're not appeasing him the way they were before. Now it seems like, they're not actively opposing him, but it seems to me they're kind of like ignoring him. They're pretending he's not in the room. Maybe they let him stand in the middle for the photo, but they don't take anything he says seriously and don't expect anything out of him. That's kind of how this last NATO summit seemed 100%. To me.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And they just basically ignored Trump. And which also means ignored the United States, because you can't trust a word out of a United States government official. What they say today, they can say the opposite tomorrow. And at the beginning of our discussion, you in the news at the top of the hour, you played those two clips by Marco Rubio that were, a week apart, about the Straits of Hormuz and charging fees for passage. Those are international waters. Under international law, you're not allowed to charge fees. We have to charge fees.
Unless, of course, Donald Trump says we will, and then I'll change my tune completely. I'm the new Lindsey Graham. I'll change it again the next day. Yeah. It's so Europe does understand now that it doesn't matter what the United States says. They need to do what they're going to do, particularly when it comes to their own security. And I think it's brilliant. You might have noticed that right after that NATO summit ended, they gathered together the coalition of the willing. You might remember that phrase from prior U.S. war effort out of the George W. Bush administration. We had our own coalition of the willing, right, after 9/11 and into the Iraq war. This coalition of the willing is a slap at the United States of America, because the United States is not part of that. There's 9 European countries, along with Ukraine, that are partnering to ensure European defense. And they've come up with an agreement to develop Europe's own independent ballistic missile defense system with Ukrainian participation and inclusion in that zone. It's going to take years and years to develop, but with Germany able to produce Patriots, and now hopefully Ukraine at some point being able to, they won't rely on the United States to supply Patriot batteries or munitions, the rockets, or any of the follow-on systems. They'll produce them themselves, and they'll defend themselves. Interesting. Speaking with political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University, we have been talking about where things stand with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We're going to take a break and be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am joined by political science professor Joel Ostro. We have been talking about the situation with Russia and Ukraine. But there are other big stories in the news today. You know, we have Sam Neill, the actor, dying. We have Lindsey Graham dying. We have allegedly Mitch McConnell sitting up and smiling, though some people think that's AI. What's captured your attention?
It's interesting that I read, and I can't remember where I saw it, a bit of a criticism of Governor Beshear of Kentucky for allowing this to go on as long as it did and not calling for a special election. I don't know that he could have done it without proof that Senator McConnell had passed away. But he was awfully quiet and not particularly insistent for quite a long time. That's kind of funny. I hadn't thought that video could have been AI.
Well, you know, somebody texted in, here's a picture of Mitch McConnell from 2023. Same shirt, same pants, same bruise on his hand. You know, like, okay.
Well, if it was AI, I know whose idea it was. And he's, I don't want Lady Beat or anyone to have to hit the dump button. He's a you-know-what on CNN.
Okay, yeah.
That would have been Scott Jennings.
Yeah, Scott Jennings, who started off an incredible number of jokes and memes about all the people who were speaking to Mitch McConnell for 20 minutes. There's a woman on the internet who posts every day. She goes, here's the latest. And she'll tell 5 or 6 of these Mitch McConnell jokes. And she said, you know, you might think that it's not a good idea to make fun of him, but since he was quite possibly one of the worst human beings who's ever lived and has had a great hand in undermining our democracy, I don't care. So I'm going to post these jokes every day.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the fawning now over Lindsey Graham, particularly when it comes to Ukraine.
Supposedly, he came back from this last trip with a renewed determination that the United States should support Ukraine.
Give me a break. The only thing he cared about was lining his pockets by sidling up to Trump. He abandoned Ukraine with Trump's his third campaign, this last one, and since Trump took office, if Lindsey Graham wanted to support Ukraine, the United States Congress at least would have passed legislation demanding that we continue to arm and support Ukraine. He never did that. He didn't give a damn. It was all for show. This last trip to Ukraine was all for show. I don't believe it for a second. He's didn't raise a peep with the lifting of sanctions against Russia. Is all for this idiotic war against Iran. No, I mean, all Lindsey Graham ever wanted to do, never having served anywhere near the military before, was to bomb countries. That's all he cared about.
So you don't think it's true that he had a big change of heart and was going to lobby Trump? Because this has been posted like, oh, isn't it a tragedy that right when he was going to fight for Ukraine, he died? So you to think
the only
that's
heart change
baloney?
Lindsey Graham had was when his heart stopped. Pardon me. I know maybe it's too soon, but no, I'm not going to shed a tear over that guy.
Yeah,
especially given how he. You know, at one point, he and Senator McCain and then Senator Biden were a triumvirate of standing up against Russian aggression and for U.S. interests around the world and engagement around the world. He abandoned all that and has sullied any reputation he might have wished to hold on to by that. The decimation of USAID and U.S. alliances, he rallied around Trump every step of the way. No.
All right. So he wasn't going to be. Is there anybody in the Senate or in the Congress who's not a Democrat, who's a Republican, and is a big supporter of Ukraine?
Yeah, well, what's his name in the House? Mike. Oh shoot, his name is escaping me now.
Okay.
Chairman of the Armed Services Committee, maybe Mike something. He's been pretty consistent, and there've been a few others, but he's been the most. It's going to come to me after we're off the air. Sorry.
Okay, so there are Republicans who do support Ukraine. You know,
Yes.
one of the things I wonder, because that's, Donald Trump has kind of been hot and cold, but mostly cold on the subject of Ukraine. But now that Donald Trump seems to be doing everything in his power to make this the worst midterm election that Republicans have ever faced, trying to push the SAVE Act, affordability is a hoax. Let me tell you, let's talk about the 2020 election yet again. It doesn't seem like he's very supportive of the party. Do you think, whether it's on Ukraine or other topics, we will start to see more senators and or congresspeople of the Republican Party distance themselves from Trump? I was going to say split off, but that's too harsh. Nobody would ever do that. But maybe on an issue here or an issue there, distance themselves from the prevailing Trump wisdom?
I'll believe it when I see it. Do you see any evidence of that?
No. And whenever I think
cult.
that I start to see evidence, they back off. Like Bill Cassidy, who voted with Democrats for the War Powers resolution to rein him in Iran. And then Trump called him up and said, because apparently Cassidy was like, you should have consulted us. And supposedly Trump called him up and said, I'll consult you every time from now on going forward. And Cassidy was like, oh, okay, well, I'll change my vote then.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's a cult. And they follow the leader. There's been no congressional independence, certainly not from that party. Either marginally more in the Senate, but not really. They're basically terrified of doing anything that would look like standing up to Trump, and frankly, they're all profiting handsomely from it.
So, what do you think is going to be the big news story? I mean, has Iran eclipsed Ukraine? I mean, I read all the big major media, both newsletters and their digital websites, and frankly, it's Iran. It's not so much Ukraine anymore.
It hasn't been for a while.
Yeah,
and there's still genocide going on in Gaza as well, and Israel committing atrocity by the day in the West Bank, seizing territory, killing civilians, displacing them from their homes on a daily basis, and bombing the heck out of Lebanon for little apparent reason. We don't hear about any of that, and that's not accidental given who owns the majority of major American media now.
The New York Times is saying that the battle between Russia and Ukraine now is a battle for minds, how people are thinking, what they're thinking about this war. I don't know, it kind of seems to me there's still a lot of drones involved as well, as opposed to what people are thinking.
But I also saw a report today that's from a source that I trust, that the next phase of Ukraine's campaign against Russia is going to be one of psychological warfare, like Russia has been waging against all the democracies of the world, first and foremost ours, to try to penetrate into the Russian information space, to reinforce the harm that is coming to the Russian people as a result.
But since the media is controlled by the government, how would that be done? Like trying to get through on Signal or social media posts, or how would you even do that?
But maybe also hacking into Russian media. I don't know. Ukraine has shown no shortage of ingenuity, and the fact that it is far and away the world's leader in drone technology, military drone technology. I don't doubt their capacity to successfully implement a new strategy in this war, because every time they implement a new strategy, it seems to be wildly successful.
It really does.
Yep.
I know that they're in the fight of their lives, but they have been so resourceful, and they have every time somebody seems to count them out, they just come back swinging. And
part of it's also their opponent, though, Joan. Like throughout its history, the one thing that Russia has never been known for is particularly nuanced military strategy. And that's not something that's ever really interested Russia. So
even though they're a superpower, you don't think that they're renowned for strategic thinking when it comes to this stuff?
Not strategic thinking. Remember the wars in Chechnya? It was the same. And in Afghanistan, they just treat their people as disposable fodder. And Russia's never really seemed to care how many of its own citizens get killed in a war. You either freeze the French out and wait them out and let them freeze while Russians die, or just keep sending wave after wave to overwhelm the opponent. This new technological era, though, has given Ukraine an ability to push back against that, and it's been remarkable.
Wow. So I've asked you this before.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Aha, do you see any end in sight?
Had it not been for the U.S. election of Donald Trump, my answer would have been yes, because Ukraine would still have sufficient stocks of Patriot missiles to launch from those launchers, and Russia's missiles would not be getting through the way they are now. And that would have allowed Ukraine, on the flip side, to devote more resources to attacking Russia rather than, rebuilding and caring for its own infrastructure, cities, and civilians. And add to that the basic freezing of supply of any American weaponry to Ukraine over the last, 18 months. That would have been different. As it is now, I think the hope is, from Ukraine's part, is that they can really blitz at Russia and continue to cause this kind of pain, degrade its ability to refine and export oil and gas, and at the same time cripple the Russian economy by starving it of fuel. And that may, in the end, and I've said this from the beginning, Joan, you know this from the early weeks, ultimately it's going to be Russia that ends this war, and it's going to have to be the Russian people that make political change.
Wow.
For it to really and truly end.
Joel, thank you so much for being here. It is always a pleasure to get updated on all this stuff by you.
You didn't call me names.
I didn't call you a name, and I'm trying very hard not to ever call you that name.
Yeah, no, you're not. As soon as you get off.
Brian can call you that name, but not me. That's going to do it for me today. Patty is going to be joined by the people from Ravenswood on Tap Craft Beer and Music Fest. And as I said before, remember tomorrow on Richard Chu Show, he's going to talk to Dr. Annie Andrews. She's running for Senate in South Carolina, and now she doesn't know who she's running against. I will see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Political science professor William Muck is going to be a part of our conversation. And on Wednesday, David Hochberg will be joining us. So have a great evening, my friends. I will talk to you tomorrow, and good night.